VikesNow, Dustin Baker, the Friday, April 22nd edition. I am here with Aaron Rupar. How are you, good sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Give us a little bio about yourself and maybe tell us where the Vikings fandom came from.
Sure. Well, I'm a political journalist, and these days I'm independent. I have a newsletter called Public Notice. That's on Substack, so that's kind of my gig these days. I was at Vox for a number of years before going solo, and grew up in Minnesota. And so I actually had Viking season tickets from 2000 through 05. So that was when I was in high school into college. And then when I moved to DC in 06 briefly, I had to obviously get rid of them. So that was kind of a bummer. But I ended up coming back to Minnesota in, I guess it was 2007. And so I was at the AP record game against San Diego that year. And I was at the Favre Greg Lewis game a couple years later. The Vikings are really my ride or die team. When I moved to DC for a second time, a few years later, I got into the Wizards and the Nationals. And so I kind of cheated on the T-Wolves and the Twins a little bit, but for obvious reasons, the Washington football team never held that much appeal to me. I did see the Vikings, I think, lose twice out there playing Washington, but diehard fan, still try to get to a couple games each season. And I don't think I have probably the expertise that you do in terms of X's and O's and, the front office, the moves and things like that. But I watch the games closely, and, it's a thrill to be on to chat some Vikings with you.
Well, thank you. You might have to cheat on the Timberwolves after last night.
Oh my God. Yeah. We were talking before you started recording. I was at the game, so I seem a little morose and kind of sad. I was texting with my friends who I was there with. I mean, that was easily, because we were talking, that was easily the most devastating loss I've seen in person. Obviously the Vikings had their share of devastating losses, but I was fortunate enough not to be at any of them.
Yeah.
Granted, it wasn't an elimination game. They play again tomorrow, but it definitely hurt.
Yeah, it was needed. So it was needed to maintain legitimacy within the series, in my opinion. So I'm a basketball mind too. And back in 2003, Michael Jordan retired from the Wizards, and I needed a new guy. I was 19 years old, and because there was so much LeBron hype, I picked him. And it was one of the best sports decisions I've ever made. And this year, things went shitty for the Lakers, for no good reason. Yeah. And in the last week, I've been, it's been weird territory for me because LeBron's out. And so I'm pivoting to cheering for the Timberwolves. And then last night was a glaring example as to why I did what I did back then. I needed a bet hedger, and that was LeBron. And for 20 years, it's worked. This year was the outlier. And then last night, it all came rushing back. I was like, this is why I have something outside of Minnesota sport for my sanity.
All those feelings. Yeah. Cause I was texting with my brother, and he's also a diehard Vikings fan. And we kind of touched upon this morning, but that he has never really felt the same about the Vikings after the Favre New Orleans game, that kind of, that took something out of his sports fan soul that hasn't, cause he's very, we watch the games and the Vikings games, and he's kind of very dismissive. He doesn't get emotionally invested anymore.
Really?
And there's a little bit of that for me too. That game kind of stands out for me as maybe the most hurtful, because, the Gary Anderson game, I think I was like 14 at the time. And, I was a Vikings fan, but I was it was kind of before I really got into them, had season tickets and all that stuff. But the Favre one definitely hurt, because that was such an enjoyable team. And there was just something so poetic about Favre possibly taking the Vikings to the promised land. And so, that one, the T-Wolves game last night can't stack up with that, but there was definitely, to go from a 25-point lead to losing the game in a span of they were up 25 with, I think, 3 minutes left in the third quarter, really, really hurt. And I saw some people actually interestingly comparing it to the Minneapolis Miracle game, because if you recall, the Vikings were up 17-0 at halftime of that game. And of course it took the miracle for them to pull the win out. So that was maybe not as unlikely mathematically of a collapse as the Timberwolves had, but a little bit of a similarity there, where that game seemed pretty locked up at halftime. And, sadly there was no miracle for the Timberwolves last night. So
no,
what can you do?
All right, let's get into this Viking stuff. So right out of the gate here, I'm gonna ask, if Matthew Stafford can win a Super Bowl with Sean McVay, can Kirk Cousins win one with Kevin O'Connell?
Ooh, it's a hot one right out of the gate. I don't see why not. I still have some questions about Kirk as a playoff performer. Obviously he had a really nice showing in New Orleans, the playoff game that they won. Yeah, the 2019 season. I guess that game was in early 2020. So that kind of stands out as, at least one mark on his resume indicating he can perform in the playoffs. But, I think we've seen him kind of come up small and big moments in the regular season. A lot of times that kind of, raises questions as to whether he's capable. Not that Stafford, was lights out in the playoffs. I mean, he had some stinkers, and in some ways was kind of carried to the Super Bowl by the rest of his team. And so I think that would be kind of the idea, for a model of how the Vikings could do it too, would be, to kind of put him in a position to succeed. Don't ask too much of him, and hope that he can kind of game manage his way. I would say certainly the Rams defense last year, was a lot more impressive than I think what the Vikings will have this coming season. Although, they should have a pretty good pass rush, if their ends can stay healthy, which is a big question. So I think, the comparison with the Rams might go a little bit awry there, just because I'm not sure that those defenses are comparable. But, I am kind of intrigued with the theory of this offseason for the Vikings, which basically seems to be that they were held back by coaching last year and they're kind of running it back, and hoping that, the changing coaches will, lead to better results. And so I think it'll be kind of an interesting test case, and in some ways kind of a referendum, I guess, on Zimmer, even though obviously he's gone. If the team, outperforms what they did last year, I think that'll reflect positively on, the coaching change that they made. So to get back to your question, I don't see why not. But I certainly won't be picking the Vikings to win the Super Bowl this coming season. But, the NFL, weird things can happen. So, it can't be ruled out.
It kind of feels like you're saying it would be one of those Joe Flacco, Eli Manning, or Nick Foles examples where the team just gets good. They got a guy who's pretty decent, and then they win the damn thing. On that note, the Vikings right now before the draft are slated as about a 9-win team. Usually if you hear that on the surface value, you're like, well, that's mediocre. Usually Vegas odds are pretty conservative because you can't really forecast the team to go 14-3. So 9 wins is where they're at right now, which is fringe playoff contendership. Is that too high, too low, or just about right for where they should be right now?
I would certainly, if I was wagering on that, I would bet the under on that. 7 or 8 kind of feels about right. I mean, they won 7 last year. I think 8, I would, if it was set at 7.5, I'd probably bet the over on that, but 9 seems a little bit high. Certainly on the spectrum of outcomes. I mean, they're possibilities. If you simulated the season 100 times, I mean, they would win 10 or 11 games in some of those simulations. But, if I was approaching this as a bettor, that seems a little bit high. 8, I'd probably pick them to win 8 games right now. So yeah, I would bet the under on that. But is it pegged, is the over under pegged right at 9?
Yeah, it's okay. Most of them are 9s. Some of them do it for 8.5, I think, to get some more action. So yeah, it's 8.5 now. It's basically it's a redo of last year.
Well, and I guess the theory would be, you look at the division, and obviously there are a lot of questions about what Green Bay is doing. And, are the Bears really ready to make a big leap this year? Probably not. So, I mean, someone in the division is probably going to have to win 9 or 10 games, you would think. And so, I wonder what the odds are. Actually, that would be a bet I'd be intrigued to possibly make, would be Vikings to win the division, because I bet the odds on that are still, leaning towards the Packers, but you might be able to get some nice odds on the Vikings winning the division. And I feel like that could be a better investment if you're looking to gamble on something Vikings related than the over under if it's set at 9. Because I mean, it seems like it's going to be a weak division, and offensively, I just don't know if the Packers really have the weapons. Obviously, I'm sure they're going to upgrade during the draft, and there's moves to be made yet, but you're not going to replace Devontae Adams. So that would be a bet actually that I would look into is the divisional odds.
Okay. Well, I'd like to point out, I don't know if you care or not, but you're my 6th guest on this VikesNow YouTube adventure of mine. And In terms of a win forecast, you're the lowest. So
really?
I don't know if you're scarred from last night with the Timberwolves, but yeah, right now, even Chris Thomason yesterday from Pioneer Press said that felt about right. So yeah, you'll have something to say you were correct if this goes to like a 7-10.
Yeah. Season. Well, yeah. Again, I guess I'm just thinking of it because I do bet over unders quite a bit. And actually one of the best bets I've made was the Wolves. I really hammered the Wolves over this season.
Ooh, okay.
Which they locked in, with like months to spare. So that was a really, when that hit my Bovada account, that was kind of nice because it was like, wow, it's only like February and they hit their over here.
Yeah.
So that's just, I'm looking at it, in terms of the range of outcomes. And I just think that wagering for the Vikings to win 10 or 11 games seems a little optimistic to me.
Yeah.
Because again, if I had to pick a number right now, I'd pick 8 wins, and I haven't gone through the schedule, which obviously hasn't even been released yet, but that can be a helpful exercise sometimes too. And I guess maybe the theory again is just that with the weak division, you can pick up, 3-4 easy divisional wins, and hopefully that can kind of, bolster the overall total. But wow, that's usually I'm very optimistic with the Vikes. But I think that the optimistic outcomes for this team assume good health that hasn't really, like Hunter is injured every season at this point. Zarius Smith, has a history of being injured, and obviously Cousins is durable, but even Dalvin Cook, you can kind of go down the line. Thielen has injury concerns at this point, so
yeah.
When you kind of factor that in, that's where to me it seems like double-digit wins seems a little bit aggressive, and then 9 would be, if you're betting on that, 9 would be a push, obviously. So yeah.
Okay. All right. So when we were preparing for the show, you confessed that you're not a draft savant, chiefly because you don't really watch college football, and that's okay. There's a lot of viewers that are like that. But give us your sentiment on either a position or a player that you might think the Vikings take in round 1.
Well, I wanted to turn the tables on this one a little bit because, I was poking around on Twitter this morning. And it seems like there's a lot of sentiment that the Vikings should trade down. I know this isn't regarded as like a great draft necessarily. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, the trade down thing is obviously a very, it's like the previous regime, loved doing that, acquiring, kind of stockpiling the 4th round picks sort of thing. So what are you like? Do you think that the Vikings, I guess the question I would have, do you think the Vikings even make that pick at 12, or do you think it's more likely that they move down?
Well, the thing about the previous regime that we grew sour on the last 2 years because of mediocre records is we just kind of put a blanket over and be like, yeah, they sucked and it all went bad. They really didn't. The general manager was quite apt at his job. The head coach got stale and his defensive mind just went southward. So trading back wasn't necessarily a scourge. And turning the tables on me, and you're taking my thunder here because I was probably going to have a separate show, but that's okay. No, it's all good. The way that this draft cycle went back when we started looking at all of draft stuff in December and January, believe it or not, it was Sauce Gardner this, Sauce Gardner that, and by the way, more Sauce Gardner. However, now he's too good. His NFL combine was way too magnificent to be available at 12, so he ain't going to work here. And then Derek Stingley, kind of the same thing happened with him. The injury fears about him were put to rest, and he's probably going to go before the Vikings get to here. He gets to the Vikings because I think that would be a match made in heaven. So based on every time Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah is in front of a microphone, he talks about value, and we call it analytics. He calls it value. So to maximize that and to create some depth for this roster, I do indeed believe that he'll trade back, and it won't be getting 7th rounders and that bullshit like Spielman did. It'll be like getting an extra 2nd rounder, perhaps a 3rd rounder, depending on who they're trading with. So I predict something to the effect they trade with the Steelers, who want to get up to number 12 to get Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett. And then the Vikings can add a 2nd rounder. So they'd have two in the satchel there, and then also the 20th pick. And then I think I officially on board predicting that they will go with Trent McDuffie in the 1st round because he was quite fantastic in college. That fills the long-term cornerback need. And then they have 2 2nd rounders to spend probably on an edge rusher and wide receiver. So before Stingley went up the draft board. I thought that was a no-brainer, but now I just don't think he's going to be there. And there's in my circles, there's a lot of debate on this. So it's a good thing to turn the tables on me for.
Well, sure. I'd rather hear your expert opinions than my, very layperson opinions. But I mean, it seems like this year, last year, obviously there was such a glaring need heading into the draft for a tackle. And I don't really get the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it doesn't seem like there's a glaring need of that sort positional wise with the Vikings this year. Obviously they're a little thin at linebacker. You mentioned, receiver. They do seem to have their starting edge rushers, at least. Maybe they're looking for a little more depth there. So I guess that kind of, in some ways opens up a lot more possibilities, because so much of the speculation last year was linked to tackles that they might take in the first round. And I don't really get the sense that there's a similar kind of like dire need on the roster this year.
Yeah, not anymore. Let's see, a month and a half ago, there was, because at that point, Patrick Peterson was just in the corner saying, hey, I want to come back. And nobody cared. Nobody would talk to him. And then alas, they finally came to a kumbaya and he is back. So that reduced the requirement to panic draft a cornerback because he's back. And if football started tonight, the Vikings have Dantzler, Chandon Sullivan, and Peterson, and that would be mediocre. So you didn't have to reach for a corner because Peterson came back. And the same goes for Zadarius Smith. Before he signed on the dotted line, it was oft injured Hunter and DJ Wanham. And if you want to be a Super Bowl contender, you can't limp into a season with a pass rusher and a half. So, but when they got Zadarius, then you look at the like, geez, these guys are going to just cause chaos. And so those two acquisitions alone made it so that you didn't have to draft for roster need, which you never want to do in the first place. So you're correct. There's flexibility. With Darisaw, you needed a foundational left tackle once and for all, because you hadn't had one since Brian McKinney. And so Darisaw fit both a roster need and what we thought, hopefully, still is the best player available. So that's why it's kind of been more flexible, is that Adolfo-Mensah was smart to get Patrick Peterson back and Zadarius Smith. So now it's not like they're just loaded and they're, deep as hell. They still have to draft for the best player available. But I was asked, what was it? The Believe, the podcast network that I do, I did a video spot and I looked at the draft board that was there before me, and Garrett Wilson was there. And I wasn't allowed to trade back in this little mock draft. So I had to take him. And that's where the Vikings are at right now. That, that would prepare for life after Thielen. It would be Mossian from 1998, where we already got two wide receivers. We don't need another one. And then they just go get one anyway. Yeah, they get one anyway. So that would be, I was going to ask you about something that Adolfo-Mensah would be shocking in the draft. That would be mine, is that if Garrett Wilson or Drake London is staring him in the damn face, that, who's to say they're not just going to get richer on offense and be this offensive enterprise? Did you have one in mind, or are you going to kick that one back to me?
Boy, I mean, within the realm of things that are reasonable, I didn't have anything that, you could trade Kirk Cousins to Pittsburgh or something. That would be shocking.
He'd have to rubber stamp it, though, that no trade clause.
Oh, okay. Does he have a full no trade, or is it?
Okay,
so he would have to. I mean,
to take the discount to $35 million. You know how Carr got 40.3 or whatever. To get Cousins down to a cheap $35 million, I think they had to slip in the no trade.
Okay, so that wouldn't happen. That was going to be mine, but obviously that's not realistic. So I mean, I think taking a impact receiver would certainly qualify as shocking, and I think that's the type of pick that fans love. Skill position offensive guys are always kind of enticing. Although the history of obviously, the Jefferson pick was a huge hit, but why am I blinking on the receiver they took in the first round a few years earlier? He ended up in Jacksonville this previous season.
Laquan Treadwell.
Right. So I mean, those picks can kind of, they can go either way, but Treadwell, I think there were some questions about him coming, his Vikings tenure, just with his ability to separate and speed and things like that. And he, so he was a first round pick, but I think that there were some red flags there to begin with. But certainly, Thielen, I think it's not unreasonable to have a contingency plan at this point. I mean, he was injured most of the year last year. It just wasn't a great season for him. And at his age, I think that would make sense if there's a receiver that you think could be an impact player to take, especially given what we were talking about earlier with not having a glaring need, that could be a good opportunity to sort of bolster that position long term. So, yeah, I mean, I think that would qualify as taking receiver. I think would qualify as shocking. But that seems like that would be within the realm of possibility too.
Yeah, let's see, the second guest I had who writes for Vikings Territory, Wes Johnson, his example of a quasi shocker was a kind of an interesting one. And I don't know if he's sticking to this, but 2 weeks ago he did. He said that even if Sauce Gardner and Derek Stingley are on the board at 12, Quasi still trades back. And that would ruffle some feathers because Vikings fans are convinced that those two are, godlike. And so that's an example of one to keep in mind. Another thing I want to ask you about rounding out the show is free agency. Do you think the Vikings are done signing big name free agents?
Well, so how many big name free agents are even left at this point?
JC Treader is the one that's always linked because he would be better than Bradbury. Akeem Hicks has been rumored for 2 months to maybe come to this team. Honey Badger's out there, but he'd be expensive as shit. So there are guys.
And I
Richard
suppose they
Sherman.
Because center seems like a position of need. Because Bradbury. I mean, obviously Bradbury kind of got benched last year, and is Mason Cole still even on the roster at this point?
No, he went to the Steelers. He's probably going to start there.
Oh, wow. He's going to start there. Jeez. Yeah. Good luck to them, I guess. But yeah, I mean, certainly the center is a position that if there is a good center available, I could certainly see that. I mean, it seems like most of the impact guys are already signed, but I mean, you tick through some names that would be certainly helpful for the Vikings. So, I mean, so what is how much flexibility do they have cap wise at this point to make a move like that?
Not much. They've got about 12 million, but around 8 or 9 of that has to go to practice squad in the draft class. Yeah. But the working theory is if they really wanted JC Treader or, Richard Sherman or somebody, they could in theory restructure the contracts of Dalvin Cook and Eric Kendricks and do the thing that they did with Hitman and Thielen, where they just add a little bit in the future. Then they could do it. But I'm just curious because there are actually about 10 really good free agents that are left. And this happens every year. The first wave happens, second wave happens, then the draft. And then there's these dudes that are usually hanging out waiting to be signed.
Right. Well, and if you had Richard Sherman and Patrick Peterson, those two guys in like 2014 or 15 would have been, the greatest cornerback pairing of all time. And that, Sherman's actually a fun guy to cheer for. He kind of has that, bring it back to Timberwolves, a little bit of that like Patrick Beverly type swagger. And I did like what Peterson did for the Vikings last year. I mean, it was one of those, it was one of those interesting cornerback seasons where it's kind of like, it wasn't like he made a lot of impact plays, but that can be good if you're not being targeted. So, and obviously I think he seems like kind of a good leader in the locker room too. And so, I could be I could be on board with getting Richard Sherman. So, yeah, I mean, it seems like you were saying, I mean, if there are some names kind of lingering around and the Vikings can make it work, why not? So I don't see any reason why that would be done.
The thing that I like the most about Peterson on this team, it's kind of a weird thing for me, is that he's a high profile, all pro player, veteran in the somewhat twilight of his career. I think he said he wants to play 3 more years and he wants to be here. And it's like, what do you know that everybody else doesn't? So that's what I like, that, there are other attractive places, Chiefs, the Bucks, where he could ring chase, but for some reason he just likes it here. So
and that's because, especially with the new regime in place now, he seemed very enthusiastic, even because I would have thought maybe a year ago he was more of a Zimmer guy, that Zimmer brought him in, and so but it does seem like the vibes kind of surrounding the team when they the players did their interviews, like that was 2-3 weeks ago. Thielen did one, Cook did one, and everybody seemed to have really seems to be very excited about the new coaching staff and the new front office. And so I would imagine, I mean, your finger's on the pulse more than me. Like, are the reviews on Kwesi, are people feeling like this has been a pretty strong offseason? There's, like a lot of excitement coming into the season, or what's the overall vibe of Vikings fans at this point?
Unsurprisingly, it's been a little roller coaster because there was the obvious honeymoon where he could do no wrong. But then there was a lot of folks that, that thought he was guaranteed to rebuild the roster and trade Kirk Cousins. And when the son of a gun extended Cousins, there was some deflation where people were like, really? Yeah, I was right. Come on. Why can't you get rid of this guy? However, like a week later, he signs Zadarius Smith. And so that regalvanized folks thinking, all right, well, he's not a moron. So yeah, I'd say they're back to enthusiasm because they're both just really inspirational, likable young guys.
Yeah.
I've tried to, when they were both rolled out in their introductory press conference, I'm watching and I'm just like, wow. And I'm like, am I doing this because I'm a homer here?
Yeah.
Or are these guys really that like eloquent and spectacular? And I think it's the latter, that they're just genuinely good dudes.
Well, that's because I know that you're also a fan of the team. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic, like both being a unapologetic fan, but also covering the team. But that's, because I think a lot of fans relate to that. They want to, they root for the team, even if they can criticize it and things like that and look at it, through a critical lens. So are there a lot of are there places in Sioux Falls are there like Vikings bars there? I'm guessing that there probably are, right?
Yeah, this state is strange. You wouldn't really think it. It's like a split of, well, it's Vikings heavy. If I had to do the percentages, it's probably 40% Vikings fans, but then it's Packers and Broncos.
Yeah.
The Broncos really grab some of the fan base because of that westerly connection. And so, and then, I mean, you'll have your sprinkled in Bears fans and garbage like that. But yeah, it's mostly Broncos, Vikings, and Packers.
Well, that's got to make it kind of fun to go to bars that have NFL ticket, because you get like a nice mix
and
of
Chiefs too.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, Kansas City's not that far from there.
Yeah.
But so that's got to be kind of interesting scene at bars that have NFL ticket, because you have a lot of different fan bases represented.
Yeah. The Chiefs one isn't quite as huge as the Broncos, but it's kind of like with the Warriors rise to power. Everybody likes the Chiefs now, which is fair. That's how sports go. All right. The last question I have, I asked this Chris Thomason yesterday, and I'll preface it the same way. A year ago right now, on my podcast with McKinney, we were talking about players that could break out that we had no idea that would occur. And none of us guessed it right, but it turned out it was KJ Osborne. He out of nowhere told himself in early summer, I'm going to be a WR3. And we're like, yeah, right. You didn't do shit last year. And then he just went and won the job, and he's been the best WR3 the Vikings have seen in like a decade. Yep. Who is that guy right now that the viewers aren't thinking of that's going to end up being type of player in 2022?
Yeah, the one that came to mind for me was Irv Smith, just because I think that, there was some of this buzz with him last year, obviously, and then he got hurt. But I feel like he's been a little bit forgotten, that he's a weapon that should be healthy again this year at a position where, the Vikings don't have a lot of weapons. So, if he can stay healthy, I could see him having a nice season this year and really complimenting. Now that I'm kind of thinking through it, they have some serious pass game weapons. Even, we were talking about drafting a receiver. I kind of forgot about KJ Osborne, actually. That's a nice third receiver with Dalvin and, Irv Smith, obviously Jefferson and Thielen. So, Irv Smith is a guy that I think, has been a little bit forgotten just because he didn't play last year. The meniscus injury can be a tricky one. For guys to come back from, because, that knee in some instances just doesn't, I didn't have to have surgery on my meniscus, but I did partially tear it. And it's just, it swells up and things like that. So that it can be tricky to come back from, but if he's healthy, I could see him having a nice season this year.
Okay. Excellent. All right. That's all we got. Give us your Twitter and your Substack information, sir.
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at @Rupar. The name of my Substack publication is Public Notice. If you're interested in political journalism, check it out. And, if you're following me on Sundays during the NFL season, you'll see some Vikings tweets. I almost always lose a few followers when I post about sports, because that's not why people generally follow me. But, I'll be in Dustin's mentions quite a bit, because I like to reply, because then, people don't get offended that I'm tweeting about sports because it's not on my main feed. They don't have to see it. But
you gotta be a diplomat about this.
I get a lot of people who set alerts for my tweets, and then when I'm tweeting about sports, they'll be in my mentions kind of like sports ball ? Or, they're just confused about what's going on. So
that happened to me. There's a website called Purple Pain Forums, which is like kind of a souped up Reddit of all Viking stuff. And on the side of their page, they've got what do you call it? One of those feeds where like it's got Chris Thomason, Courtney Cronin for a while on the website, where it's dudes and gals tweets about the Vikings. And I was on there really early when people started to notice me. They put me on there because of all my stats. And then the owner messaged me and said, I don't want you to take this personally, but I had to take it down because people don't want to see pictures of your food or your kids. And I'm like, well, I was like, well, the hell with them. What am I?
Oh, you don't post that much stuff.
No,
like
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's kind of like, yeah. I mean, people are, because I'll get people, sometimes even like colleagues who I've worked with in journalism who will unfollow me, and almost always it's, oh, you too many sports tweets, and it's like, I post like one a week, maybe. And actually last night I had to turn my phone off towards the end of the Wolves game because I was so tempted to start tweeting about basketball. I was just like, just turn the phone off. Don't even look at it later when you get home. So anyway, but no, I look forward to the season and the draft, and I'll be following all of your good work. So appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, thank you, sir. We'll have you back. This round of guests, I'll probably try to have you guys back in June or July to take the pulse of the team again. Okay, sir?
Awesome.
All right, that's all we got for VikesNow, and Skol, baby.